Before this year ends, one transport network could outgrow its roads, one castle economy could collapse before the siege, and 4 armies could test whether a famous RTS series remembers its foundations. Every game here is currently listed on Steam for 2026. Some have exact dates, others retain a broad window and plenty to prove. This is not a ranking. It is the strategy slate I would watch through the rest of the year. Transport Fever 3 begins with a familiar promise. Build the line, move the cargo, collect the revenue. The interesting part starts after the line succeeds. Towns now evolve around what the network actually delivers. More passengers and freight can grow the city, but that growth adds traffic, capacity pressure, maintenance, noise, and pollution. A profitable route is therefore less of a finished solution than a new problem with a timetable. The network keeps asking to be rebuilt because the thing you fixed has become larger. Official demonstrations also show modular stations, warehouses, transport across road, rail, water, and air, and multiple climate zones. Those claims give the game breadth. The town and network feedback loop gives it a reason to matter. Steam still provides only a broad 2026 window, and beta stage demonstrations cannot prove the final economy, performance, or balance. Still, this is one of the clearest system demonstrations in the entire lineup. If Transport Fever 3 makes growth expensive in the right ways, success will not end the puzzle. It will simply make the next bottleneck more impressive. Stronghold 4 moves from transport pressure to a much older argument. A wall is only as strong as the economy behind it. The castle still depends on food, taxes, workers, raw materials, weapons, and the unpleasant discovery that stone does not place itself. Weather can affect farming and archery. Honor and population management shape what the settlement can support. Then the siege turns every economic shortcut into a military consequence. A narrow gate saves construction time until an army reaches it. A well-fed workforce matters, until too many of those workers are carrying weapons instead of bread. Firefly is bringing back moats, tunnelers, traps, wall-mounted defenses, skirmish, free build, and a story campaign set before the original Stronghold. The launch is still early access. Online multiplayer, cooperative play, and an economic campaign are planned for version 1 rather than promised for day 1. That distinction matters. Stronghold 4 does not need to modernize everything at once, but the castle economy and siege AI must already create decisions rather than nostalgia-shaped scenery. The available gameplay understands the old connection between granary and battlement. The full campaign still has to sustain it. Corsair Cove leaves the castle behind, but it keeps the logistical problem and turns it 90 degrees. This pirate settlement grows across cliffs, beaches, and narrow shelves of usable land. Buildings may be close on the map and still separated by a long climb. Bridges and ziplines are not decoration. They decide whether goods reach the next workshop before the crew begins treating punctuality as a naval myth. The part already visible is the strongest part of the pitch. Expansion reaches new resources, routes become longer, and the settlement has to move more supplies through terrain that clearly resents urban planning. Corsair Cove is scheduled for July 31st, making it the first dated release in this list. A demo is already available, but this coverage uses official material rather than pretending I have played it. The pirate theme will attract attention. The test is whether height and transport remain meaningful once the island becomes busy. If ziplines solve every route too easily, the city builder loses its defining pressure. If they create trade-offs between speed, space, and production, this could turn a beautiful island into a very efficient argument about why the rum is late. Mandate Order expands that logistics problem into an ancient Chinese city-state where farming, policy, and warfare share the same supply chain. You build without a rigid grid, organize seasonal agriculture, move cargo through courier stations, recruit retainers associated with 100 schools of thought, and use the economy to support fortifications and armies. A harvest changes what can be stored. Logistics decides whether it reaches the city. Soldiers and defenses consume whatever survives that chain. Official gameplay shows settlement growth, fields, troops, formations, chariots, and siege preparation. Steam also describes diplomacy, ritual, national policy, disasters, and sandbox play. Its risk is not a lack of ideas. It is whether the player can read how those ideas affect one another. A large system count creates depth only when the consequences are understandable. Otherwise, it creates a very historical filing cabinet. Sandustry reduces the population to one engineer and replaces the city with a factory that has to negotiate with physics. Conveyors, filters, pumps, pipes, lifts, drones, and processing machines have to work inside that environment rather than on top of a perfectly obedient grid. That changes the usual automation question. You are not only routing ore from one machine to another, you are deciding whether the floor remains a floor after the next experiment. A production line can fail because the belt is wrong, the liquid escaped, the material changed state, or the engineer became briefly confident around explosives. The visual idea is already clear. The harder question is scale. Large factory games live or die on readability and performance once dozens of small processes interact. Sandustry has shown that it can create clever local experiments. It still needs to prove that those experiments remain manageable when the factory stops being small and polite. Dungeon Settlers keeps the production chain, then gives every missing resource a name and a survival rate. The settlement grows rooms, food, equipment, research, and recruits. 4 of those recruits form an expedition party, enter randomized dungeon floors, and return with materials that expand the colony. In principle, it is a clean loop. Build above, prepare below, bring the reward home, and go deeper. Permadeath makes the return journey matter. Equipment, skills, traits, and training are investments in a person, not disposable numbers. A failed encounter can remove a developed member and force the settlement to recruit, equip, and train a replacement. The dungeon therefore reaches back into the colony even when the monsters never leave it. Combat runs in real time with tactical pause, status effects, party abilities, and changing environmental conditions. Steam lists a September 10th early access release and a public demo. The strongest design idea is also the most dangerous one. The colony and dungeon must remain equally useful. If settlement work feels like a waiting room for combat, half the game becomes administration. If expeditions feel like errands for the build menu, the other half becomes a very hazardous shopping trip. The official gameplay shows both sides. Early access must prove they genuinely depend on each other. Star Wars Zero Company changes the scale again. This is a single-player, turn-based tactics campaign set near the end of the Clone Wars. You assemble a squad of original and customizable operatives, prepare at a base, investigate targets, deploy on missions, and develop abilities and synergies across the campaign. The official gameplay emphasizes positioning, cover, movement, and specialist powers rather than an action game wearing tactical clothes. What is not yet clear is how deep the base, investigations, campaign persistence, and failure consequences become between those missions. Zero Company is scheduled for August 27th. It also has one of the smallest clean gameplay pools among the major releases here, so this segment is deliberately shorter. The license can supply spectacle on its own. The strategy has to come from missions that reward different squads and plans, not simply the correct ability icon. Right now, the tactical foundation is visible. Kingdom Rush 6. Genesis TD turns the battlefield into a few roads, a handful of tower slots, and several increasingly unreasonable enemies. The core remains readable. Towers control lanes, 2 heroes move where the defense is weak, and equipped spells answer the moment when the plan develops a hole. Genesis expand the loadout across 18 campaign stages, 3 landscapes, more than 40 enemy types, and 6 bosses. Those numbers matter only if the choices interact. Tower placement establishes coverage. Heroes stall or reinforce a lane. Spells rescue a breach or create time for an upgrade. A useful stage forces you to reconsider that combination instead of repeating the same tower pattern with more damage. The demo includes 4 stages and a reduced selection of towers, heroes, and spells. The full release is set for September 24th. Final difficulty and campaign pacing remain unknown, but the footage clearly shows the active tower defense loop. If this mix is useful, leave a like and subscribe to the Strategy Player. Then tell me which game deserves a full preview, because choosing one is already becoming its own resource allocation problem. Genesis does not need a larger map to justify itself. It needs stages that make every small decision expensive. Fragile Existence takes resource allocation literally. People, ammunition, fuel, modules, and supplies are physical dependencies inside a fleet that is trying to keep humanity alive. The campaign begins at the strategic scale. Fleets can split, use breach gates, scan systems, and choose planets. A ground expedition then establishes a temporary base, extracts and refines resources, and returns what the ships need. Crew assignments determine which modules can operate. Weapons require ammunition. Vehicles need fuel. Staying too long risks the threat that is following the fleet. That creates a strong survival chain. Route choice leads to a planet. Scanning finds an opportunity. The settlement converts it into supplies. Those supplies restore the fleet. The fleet moves before the opportunity becomes a trap. Ground RTS and orbital combat sit inside that movement rather than forming isolated modes. This is perhaps the broadest systems promise in the lineup, and 2 trailers cannot prove that every layer connects cleanly. The real challenge is interface, pacing, and consequence. Changing scale must feel like one survival decision, not 5 games waiting for their turn. Fragile Existence has shown the shape of that chain. It has not yet shown that the chain will hold. Planet Zoo 2 replaces the survival fleet with a zoo where the new construction problems can fly away or live underwater. Fully aquatic animals require tanks, viewing areas, and water conditions. Fully flying birds need aviaries and space that works vertically. Those additions matter because they change what a habitat asks the player to build, staff, finance, and connect to guest paths. A new animal is useful design only when it creates a new management decision. The familiar loop remains. Habitat quality affects animal welfare and behavior. Good exhibits attract guests. Guests fund expansion. Staff, amenities, pathing. And finances determine whether the larger zoo remains functional. Wildlife reserves add a conservation destination outside the normal exhibit cycle. Frontier describes easier pathing tools, a claim worth testing after the paths have survived a crowded afternoon. Final optimization and economy balance are equally unproven. Planet Zoo 2 arrives October 13th. Its opportunity is making aquariums, aviaries, reserves, and ground habitats compete for the same money and space. If those systems overlap well, the prettiest enclosure may also become the reason the staff budget is crying. Chronicles. Medieval begins the final rise in scale by putting the commander inside the formation. This is a third-person medieval sandbox set during the 100 Years' War. You build a character and an army, choose conflicts, issue real-time orders, position longbowmen, men-at-arms, crossbowmen, and cavalry, then fight alongside them instead of watching from a detached command layer. That physical position can create a useful tension. Joining the melee gives immediate influence, but it also reduces the distance needed to read the entire line. Commanding from safety provides perspective while the soldiers absorb a problem you could have helped solve. The best version of this system makes personal combat and army command compete for attention, rather than letting one replace the other. The current trailers demonstrate battle scale far more clearly than the world simulation surrounding it. Hundreds of soldiers look convincing. Reputation, campaign consequence, and sandbox depth need the same level of proof. Chronicles. Medieval already knows how to stage a battle. The harder task is making the reason for that battle matter after the field is empty. Warhammer 40,000. Dawn of War IV closes the main list with the largest media pool and the simplest editorial question. Does this return to the series' RTS foundations produce meaningful battlefield decisions? The visible answer begins with economy and map control. Capture territory, secure resources, build the force, and decide which losses the next push can afford. Space Marines, Orcs, Necrons, and the Adeptus Mechanicus bring different units and battlefield rhythms. The Mechanicus makes its series debut here. Official battlefield reports show base-backed combat, unit composition, abilities, reinforcement, and the familiar RTS problem of discovering that the enemy understood map control while you were admiring the explosions. The release date is September 17th. The demonstrated gameplay clarifies what the game is trying to be. It does not prove campaign quality, AI, performance, balance, or multiplayer reliability. 11 official videos are still marketing material, not a verdict. If the four factions demand different economies and decisions, this can be a substantial RTS return. If they mostly change the color of the battlefield, the roots will be present without the depth that made them worth returning to. Two honorable mentions deserve attention, with shorter coverage because their evidence is thinner. Gilded Destiny is an industrial-age grand strategy game connecting production, transport, society, politics, and war. Steam describes a globe with more than 1 million hexes, alongside population careers, political parties, reforms, and supply lines. Industry and transport move people into new work. Those careers change political interests. Armies depend on the production and logistics underneath it. The project is listed for 2026, but limited official motion material cannot prove how those systems communicate, perform, or remain readable. Beyond Astra pushes in the opposite direction, from a planetary city to a galaxy that remains physically connected. The real-time 4X design moves between city building, planetary management, physical trade routes, diplomacy, and ground or space combat. Active pause is intended to make that scale manageable. The continuous zoom from a settlement to multiple systems is striking. Beyond Astra is also being built by an independent creator duo, making the execution risk proportionate to its scope. Steam lists a broad 2026 window. Current trailers show the scale change, planetary construction, fleets, and combat, but they cannot prove AI, balance, world count, or campaign performance. I want to see this work. The rest of 2026 does not lack strategy games. It lacks finished evidence, and that is what makes this lineup interesting. Which game has shown enough to earn your confidence, and which one still owes you a better demonstration? Put both in the comments, and subscribe to the Strategy Player for the full previews, reviews, and systems analysis as these release dates arrive.